Let's talk about one of the hardest pills to swallow. Just because someone showed up doesn't mean they actually cared. That's one of the quiet betrayals we don't talk about enough. The illusion of effort can be just as damaging as complete absence because it confuses us. It gives us something to cling to when the truth would actually set us free. You've probably told yourself 1,000 times, but they were there. They answered my call. They checked in sometimes. They came to that one thing I invited them to. And yes, maybe they did, but care isn't about presence alone. It's about presence with purpose. Just showing up doesn't equal love. It doesn't mean you mattered to them in the way you thought you did. People can show up out of guilt, out of habit, out of not wanting to look like the bad guy. But none of that means their heart was truly invested in yours. There's a difference between showing up to say they were there and someone showing up to say, I see you. I hear you. I care about how this feels for you. And if we're honest, goal of the gray rock, we often ignore that difference because to face it would mean rewriting the story we've clung to. It would mean re-examining all those moments we built our self-worth on. And that's terrifying. It's easier to believe that small gestures equal big love than to admit the relationship was hollow in the places we needed it to be full. Think about the times you were at your lowest, really struggling, and they texted, thinking of you, but never followed up. Or they gave a quick hug but avoided your eyes. They were physically present but emotionally vacant. And still, you convinced yourself that their presence mattered more than their disconnection. You excused it. You told yourself they cared in their own way. You lowered the bar and called it loyalty. But here's what we need to say out loud. Attention is not the same as intention. Someone can pay attention to you without ever intending to love, support, or respect you. They can perform care, mimic it of the gray rock, even master the tone of someone who gives a damn without feeling any of it in their soul. That doesn't make them evil, but it does make them unavailable in the ways you needed them to be. And the longer you accept that surface level care, the more you train yourself to tolerate emotional starvation. We do this because we're terrified of what it means if they never truly cared. Because if they didn't, then we have to look at all the times we overextended, overgave, overapologized, and overhoped. We have to sit with the pain of realizing we were chasing a version of the relationship that only existed in our imagination. And that kind of grief of the gray rock, that's not soft grief, that's identity level grief. That's the kind that shakes you. But here's something else that's true. Letting go of the illusion is where real power begins. When you stop clinging to breadcrumbs and finally admit they were never going to feed you in the way your soul needed, that's the moment you reclaim your clarity. That's when you stop looking at their absence like a wound and start seeing it for what it was, proof. The goal of the gray rock, proof of the truth you were too brave to face before. The illusion of effort kept you stuck, not because you were weak, but because you were human, because hope is hardwired into us. The gray rock, because we believe in connection so deeply that we'd rather bend reality than admit someone just didn't care in the way we hoped they would. That doesn't make you foolish. That makes you someone with heart, someone who loved, someone who tried. But now it's time to look that truth in the eye. They showed up, yes, but they didn't see you. And that's not your fault. That's just something you need to finally stop pretending didn't hurt. One of the most heartbreaking realizations is understanding that emotional unavailability is not love. It's not care. It's not connection. It's not something to be romanticized as. They're just bad at expressing their feelings. And yet we do it. We explain it away. We assign meaning to their silence. We write poetry in our heads about their distance, convincing ourselves that maybe they're just complicated or scared or healing. But that isn't love. That's longing wrapped in denial. So many of us grew up believing that love had to be hard to earn, that the person who doesn't text back, who shrinks when we cry, who changes the subject when we're vulnerable, they're the ones worth fighting for. We learn to chase it. We internalize the idea that emotional intimacy is something we have to prove ourselves worthy of. And so when someone keeps their heart behind a locked door, we take that as a challenge instead of a warning. But here's what I need you to hearing. If someone consistently withdraws when you are in pain, if they can't sit with your sadness or they minimize your fears, that isn't a reflection of your value. It's a reflection of their limitation. And yet we internalize it. We tell ourselves we're being too much, too emotional, too needy. We shrink ourselves so they'll stay. We dilute our truth to avoid their discomfort. And in doing that, we lose connection, not just with them, but with ourselves. Love, real love, doesn't flinch at your feelings. It doesn't get quiet when you need comfort. It doesn't treat your vulnerability like a burden. The person who truly cares about you doesn't disappear into silence when things get heavy. They lean in, they ask, they stay, they listen, even when it's messy, especially when it's messy. But when someone is emotionally unavailable, the gray rock, what you often experience is inconsistency. They're warm one moment and cold the next. They show up when it's convenient, but vanish when your needs require depth. And still, you find yourself holding on because a part of you believes that if you just do better, be easier, be less, they'll finally open up. You wait for them to meet you where you are, not realizing you've already walked miles in their direction while they haven't even taken a step. This pattern doesn't just hurt. It confuses. It distorts your ability to trust your emotions. You begin to question whether your needs are valid at all. And this is the most dangerous part of being close to someone who is emotionally unavailable. You start gaslighting yourself. You convince yourself that wanting to be heard, seen, and held is too much to ask. You mistake emotional abandonment for emotional strength. And slowly, you start to believe that this is the best you'll get. But here's the truth no one told Yug. The being available emotionally isn't some rare skill set that only a few chosen people possess. It's a choice. It's a practice. It's an act of courage. And the people who choose not to meet you there aren't mysterious. They're avoidant. They're protecting their own discomfort at the expense of your well-being. And I get it. It's hard to walk away because you've built so much of your identity around hoping they'll finally see you, finally choose you, finally care in the way you've always imagined. But holding on to someone who can't meet you emotionally is like yelling into an empty canyon. You may hear an echo, but it's never really a reply. And deep down, you know that. You deserve a connection where your emotions are not something to tiptoe around, where your pain isn't an inconvenience, where you don't have to shrink just to feel safe. Because safety isn't silence, it's presence. It's the quiet, steady comfort of someone who doesn't run when your heart is heavy. So if they've been emotionally absent, if they've looked at your tears with blank eyes, if they've met your vulnerability with withdrawal, then you already have your answer. Stop mistaking emotional vacancy for mysterious depth. It's not love. It's absence dressed up in presence. And the most courageous thing you can do is stop calling it anything else. Answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off. It's easy to confuse consistency with commitment, especially when we've been conditioned to accept the bare minimum as love. Someone calls every day, texts, good morning. You think the answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off, shows up to dinner, but what's underneath that? What's the real intention behind their presence? You think the answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off. We want so badly for it to mean something deeper that we rarely stop to ask if they're just repeating a routine because it's comfortable, because it's convenient. I think the answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off. It keeps you close without requiring them to go deep. We tend to believe that if someone is around often enough, they must care. If they don't leave, the answer is setting boundaries, cutting mean then they're invested, musted. But the truth is a person can stay in your life without ever stepping fully into it. You think the answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off. They can orbit your world without ever landing in your heart. And it's confusing because consistency looks like security. But when you peel it back, talks are setting boundaries, cutting them off. You reel them off. You realize there's no real connection. Just habits, just enough interaction to keep the illusion going. Commitment, real commitment isn't just about staying. You think the answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off. It's about choosing you in the moments that actually matter, leaning and during conflict. It's about being emotionally available when you're hurting. You think the answer is cutting them off. It's about doing the work to grow together, not just maintaining the same predictable routine because it feels safe. And yet, you think the answer is bound them off. So many of us settle for someone who's consistent on the surface while completely absent underneath. You know that feeling. You're in the same room with them. You think the answer is boundaries, cutting them off, maybe even every day, but something feels hollow. You do all the right things, but when you need something real, empathy, support, answer is cutting the accountability off. They suddenly don't know how to show up. Or worse, they act like your needs are asking too much, and still you stay. You think that the answer is bound them off. You convince yourself that this is what love looks like. You silence that quiet voice inside that keeps whispering, this isn't it. Why do we do that? You think, Tuck, that the answer is cutting them off. Why do we stay with people who are present but not really with us? Because we're terrified of starting over. We've invested time. We've built routines. Is setting them off. We've created memories, and all of that feels like proof that it must be real. But time spent is not the same as love shared. Cutting them off, and memories can be made in the absence of meaning. You think the answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off. That's the part that hurts the most. Admitting the life you built with someone might have been more about familiarity than intimacy. Setting boundaries, cutting them off. It takes courage to tell the truth, to say, yes, they're here, but they're not really committed to me. You're not in the way I need. The answer is cutting them off, not in the way that nourishes both of us. It takes even more courage to walk away from someone who's consistent in showing up, but inconsistent in showing care. You think the answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off, because their predictability gives you a false sense of safety. And letting go of that feels like cutting the last string holding everything together. But here's the true thing. It's cutting them off. Commitment without emotional depth is just performance. It's someone doing enough to look involved while avoiding the vulnerability that true connection demands. Answer is cutting them off. You'll spend years trying to extract meaning from the smallest gestures. You'll overanalyze texts, cling to anniversaries. The answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off. Weird old messages, hoping to find some evidence that you mattered more than the patterns suggest. And that's exhausting. Answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off. That's what slowly drains your spirit without even realizing it. You deserve more than presence without purpose. You think the answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off. You deserve more than someone who's just around. You deserve someone who meets your emotional depth with their own. You think the answer is cutting them off. Someone who doesn't just show up, but shows up with intention, with clarity, with effort that matches yours, not just in rhythm, but in heart. You think the answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off. So if you've been fusing consistency for commitment, if you've been holding on because they haven't left, pause. Ask yourself if they've really arrived. You think the answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off. Have they met you at the level you're showing up, or are they just keeping you close enough to not lose you while never really choosing you? It's tying them on to stop mistaking habit for love, because love doesn't just stay. It shows up fully. Answer is cutting them off. Sometimes the hardest truth to face is that we've been lying to ourselves, not because we're foolish, because we're human. We all want to belong. You think the answer is cutting them off. We all want to feel wanted, accepted, safe in someone's presence. That need is hardwired into us. But the problem is when we're desperate for connection, you think the answer and boundaries, cutting them off. Stop seeing clearly. We start justifying behaviors that hurt. We start making excuses for why someone doesn't show up, why they don't listen, why they make us feel small. Think the answer is cutting them off. And we tell ourselves, it's not that bad. At least they're still here. But deep down we know. We always know. You think the answer boundaries, setting them off. There's that little voice, quiet but persistent, that keeps whispering, this doesn't feel right. And instead of listening to it, we silence it. The answer is setting boundaries, cut them off. We push it down with distractions, with over-explaining their behavior to friends who stopped asking about them months ago. You think the answering with Townser is setting them off, because facing the truth would mean confronting something we're not ready to deal with here, that we've been holding on to a relationship where care was never really mutual. You think the answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off, that maybe, just maybe, they never truly cared at all. And it's not because you're weak, it's because you needed them to care. You needed that connection to mean something. You think the answer is staple boundaries, cutting them out. Without it, you'd have to question your own choices. You'd have to wonder why you stayed so long. You think the answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off. Why you gave some of yourself to someone who never met you halfway. And that's a painful reckoning, to realize that love, or what you believed was love. You think the answer is cutting boundary. It was actually just a lifeline you were clinging to because you were terrified of being alone. But loneliness isn't the worst thing. You think the answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off, believing your love while slowly being starved of emotional nourishment. That's worse. You think being the bouncer is setting them off, believing you matter to someone while constantly feeling like a burden. That's worse. You think the answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off, pretending you're okay with the bare minimum because you're afraid that walking means failure. That's worse, because it chips away at your sense of worth. It teaches you to expect less, to settle, to doubt your instincts. We tolerate being ignored, dismissed, breadcrumbed, not because we don't see it. You think the dealing with Tonsor is cutting them off, but because we're trying to protect the fantasy that maybe they'll change. Maybe if we're patient enough, loyal enough, forgiving enough, answer is setting boundaries. Cutting them off, they'll finally show up the way we need them to, but you've already been more than enough, and they still didn't. That's not your failure. The answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off. That's the truth you've been avoiding. You know those moments when you share something vulnerable and they brush it off or change the subject or make it about them. Toxic boundaries, cutting them off. That's not love. It's not emotional safety. That's a clue. Or when you're hurting and they say, you think the answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off. I don't know what you want me to do, or they disappear altogether. That's a clue. When they only show interest when they feel like they're losing you. You think the answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off. When they're good at grand gestures but terrible at showing up consistently, that's not proof they care. That's proof they know how to keep you hanging on. Cutting boundaries, setting them off. There's difference. And you stay, you tolerate, you justify, you shrink, not because you don't see it, but because you see everything. You think answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off. And you're afraid that if you finally admit the truth, it will break you. But what if the truth isn't here to break you? What if it's here to set you free? You think the answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off. You've always had that inner knowing, gut feeling. That HH tells you, I'm not being seen. You're not imagining it. You think the answer is setting boundaries off. You're not you're dramatic or hard to love. You're just finally waking up to what your soul has been trying you for a long time. You think the answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off, and the minute you stop fighting that truth to reclaim your power, you begin to realize that you don't have to earn love by being less of yourself. The answer is setting them off. You don't have to beg for affection, for clarity, for consistency. It's okay to grieve the version of the relationship you wished for. It's okay to mourn what never was. You think the answer is setting boundaries, cutting them off, but don't confuse the idea of them with the reality of how they made you feel. And don't let your fear of being alone keep you stuck in a place where you were already lonely. The answer is setting boundary off, cutting them off. You knew, you've always known, and now it's time to stop ignoring what your heart has been trying to tell you.